Or not? Okay, let's take a look what's happening.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
that's good. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay because I don't know, my camera gives me like 120, maybe max or whatever. So, looks
Excuse
like
me.
we are live. Let me know if you can all hear me and everything. But other than that, what's up, everybody? It is Friday. This is John from Coding Addict, and welcome to another Web Dev Power Hour live stream / podcast. And as always, I'm joined by one and only Mr. Paul Bratlovsky, the mastermind behind YouTube channel Coding After 30. Again, Paul's channel is Coding After 30. How are you, Paul?
Very good. How you doing today?
Good, good, good. Just
Good.
enjoying Friday.
Yeah, yeah. That's nice.
Same there.
Same.
Yeah,
Enjoying life.
if you want to check out some cool content, be sure to visit Paul's channel, Coding After 30. And while you're there, be sure to smash the like button and help with an algorithm. Have you started doing more live streams than
I'm going to get back to it now that I
tomorrow?
have. Yeah, tomorrow I'm gonna do the soft
Soft
skills
skills.
and the normal one that I do every Saturday. I'm gonna get back into it, and then I'm still gonna do the Tuesday night stream. Just because and recently, I'm interviewing for a job. If I get it, I'll tell you guys where it is if somebody didn't guess yet where it is. But all the things that we talk about on this podcast, everything that I talk about on my channel, I'm actually like doing it and seeing it, how like, wow, these are the things that are helping me to interview better or be prepared more, and wow, like these things are not. And so that's been my like kind of experience of like learning, like, wow, like the things we talk about here and like on my channels, like they're actually good advice, John, like they're actually
Actually,
working.
there's today's theme. I also want to ask you a lot of questions about the interviews that you're going through right now. Whether you apply, something we'll talk about today.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if you prefer us listening in a podcast format, you can always find us at webdevpowerhour.com. Again, the URL is webdevpowerhour.com, as well as on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Just look for Web Dev Power Hour. Weekly tips or fails. I have a pretty simple one. If you want to kill the port, um, regardless whether you're using Windows or Mac, you can go with npx kill hyphen port and then whatever port value. So it's a small package that
Oh,
you
cool.
don't even need to install. You can just go with execute. I know that it was, I wouldn't say often, but when I was developing Mern, it's here and there. You kind of want to kill the port. So it's pretty nifty. What about you? Any hot tips?
I don't know if they're hot tips, but I've been working with context, and I wanted to use a use reducer to store all the state in my context. And so I learned about this package called Immer. And normally, whenever you're working with use reducer or you're doing like Redux and you work inside the reducer, you can't directly mutate state. So you have to use like magic of ES6, like, to either make a copy of an object of the array or what have you. And which is not that difficult, but there's this package Immer, which basically creates a copy of that state. And they also have their own, how in React you have use reducer, they have one called use Immer reducer. And what that does, it will take your state and will make its own copy. So now whenever you're working and writing your reducer, you could literally just mutate the state because you're mutating a copy. And so it does make it a little bit easier writing your logic. So do you need it? No, you don't. But like when you start working on the reducer and you have multiple like state objects, it's just easier for me, just like, hey, I just need to change this directly, even though behind the scenes you're doing it to a copy. And so it makes it a lot easier. So that's my uh, thing that I discovered.
Fun fact: the Redux toolkit actually is using Immer
Yes.
right out of the gate. And this is
Yeah.
one of another interesting topics that I think we can just discuss in general when we're talking about some very popular tools, let's say Next.js or at the moment Redux Toolkit. I mean, one of the ideas behind them is like they're looking at the community, they're seeing what is being used over and over and over again, and they're like, well, why don't we include it as a battery?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if everyone is putting Immer just because they're, I mean, it's not a big deal, but all the time copying state,
Yeah.
then why don't we just add it and ship it right out of the gate? So that's an interesting concept where, I mean, it's very similar to like Next.js, where again, they just set a bunch of config that is being used all the time. So you don't have to worry about it from project to project. You just come in there and you have already ready to go template. I always find that fascinating. And as far as this week's main topic, we have it's not just about your coding skills, and basically kind of the general idea I got from I was listening to one of the founders of again another successful company, and one of the things that he mentioned that he literally saw a massive increase in his sales and basically where the company was going the moment he started spending not only time on developing but half time on promoting the product. So he's a developer, but he was like, I'm gonna do 2 weeks developing the product and then 2 weeks promoting the product. And I kind of want to tie it back to something again we have discussed a lot of times over here. Paul has brought it up like I want to say at least 10 times, where it's not just about coding. It's, coding is just a part of it. You'll have to go to interviews. You'll have to set up your LinkedIn. You'll have to go to the meetups. You'll have to go to networking. And again, you can decide how much you want to do that. But I think as developers, we have this tendency, okay, I'm going to write this feature, I'm going to develop this project, and then I'll do it. And then I'll do it. And again, like I always say, this is not, I'm saying this because I'm exactly the same. But at some point it becomes like, how much are you like doing to promote yourself? It's because it's no one at this day and age, no one's gonna come to your door, knock on it, and say, look, we're this awesome company and we're looking for this like amazing developer. Yeah, you can make some awesome projects and maybe there can be even like open source and whatever. You might even get really popular, but I mean the chances are slimmer to that than you doing something, whatever you develop, whatever project you build, and then you go and promote yourself. And again, promote yourself is kind of, it's an interesting term. Again, I'm talking about going to the interviews, going through those steps, setting up the LinkedIn, and kind of doing all of those things, and then you also code. So that's where I was going with that. What do you think about this one, Paul?
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, and you know what company applying for, and some people probably already guessed, and the interviews so far.
Everyone guessed who's live right now.
Yeah, everybody knows. And the reason why I got there, it was like because I self promoted myself, not even knowing that that could actually be a possibility. I just enjoyed what I was doing, and I made myself known. And like I started with you, and you were the first one to be like, "Hey, you do this so much, like why don't you try it and see what happens?" And and the interesting thing is, if I didn't do certain things that I did before, I would not get to meet you. If I didn't get to meet you and have you tell me that, like, I would not have that idea to actually go for it. And if I didn't do all this other stuff, using the platform, writing the code, talking about the code that made me build experience and kind of not become the expert in it, but people like, oh, he talks about that all the time. People that like, then I would not gotten to that interview. And like basically like every little thing that you do creates an accumulative push for you getting that job. And so if you're sitting at home waiting, you're not going to get hired. Like, so I know it's kind of all over the place, but the point is, in today's world, you have to promote yourself. And one thing, like, I was gonna say, it's not just in coding. So I used to do mixed martial arts and MMA, and this is like the weirdest thing you would actually expect someone to ask an MMA fighter who's looking to get a fight. So one of the questions they get asked is how many followers you have on your social media. They don't care if you're like a really, really good fighter. That's important, but they also want to know like what's your reach. how do you in the community in order, like, before they give you even the chance. And some people like might be like the best fighters, but they don't have a following, they're not out there, people don't know who they are, they don't get picked. And it's like similar, I believe, in any place now getting a job, not just web development, is that you have to know the skill, but you also have to know those soft skills. You have to know how to promote yourself, and you have to align yourself in a way that the company that you're looking to apply to, you become, uh, you know, a potential candidate for them to consider based on what and how you present yourself. And if you're not presenting yourself, they don't know you exist. And that's like the unfortunate, truth.
Yeah, no, that's you brought up like a lot of interesting points in there. As far as fighting, you definitely can see, and again, this can be a representation of everything, and whether you think it's fair or not, it's a different scenario. It's really like, again, I don't want to sound mean, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter like what any person thinks, because in reality, whether you like it or not, but yeah, Jake Paul and what's his name, Logan
Yeah.
Paul,
Yeah.
they're
Seriously.
generating way more revenue because they have way more following.
Yeah.
Whether, again, and there's certain fighters who have like gone through their whole life, and they're pretty pissed about it. But that's the reality. Now, I'm not saying that it's exactly the same, let's say, in web development, where, I mean, it does matter what you know, but again, at the end of the day, a lot of times when you'll talk to people, and you'll ask them who gets hired for a team, it's usually someone who knows someone from the within the team. That
Yeah.
again, it's
Yeah.
whether you
Unfortunate,
like that or
but that's
or
the truth.
yeah, but that is the reality. And I kind of want to ask you a question. So let's say, again, you don't need to tell like the company or whatever, but during the interviews, what is your trick on self promoting? Because that's, again, one of those things where no one will do that for you. You literally, like, as weird as maybe it sometimes might sound, you'll be like in the middle of a sentence, you'll have to kind of like inject that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's, I'm doing. What's your approach?
So like it's like an art and science all together in one, and it comes with practice. But one thing that I would say is understanding what the company needs and what gap you're trying to fill with your position. Like, and so a lot of times what I do, and we talked about in the previous streams, I talk about all the time, is that I make sure that I have some questions that I ask, um, to make sure that it's not a one-way conversation where they're just talking to me. And so, like, before you go to an interview, it's good to know like what kind of stuff they're building, what tech they're using. And so when you come in, just ask about the project and be like, "Yeah, I know you guys using React and do GraphQL, and what's one of the difficulties that you're having in your project," just to kind of see what they say. And once whatever answer they give you is like, use that as like a jumping point to be like, to either add something like, "Oh, you're doing this, I had a similar problem, this is how I solved it," like one example. But the point is, I'm trying to find at any point where I could take my previous experience and present it in a way to the interviewer that I'm the right person for the job, because of A, B, and C. And if you don't, like, people have to understand, people don't read minds. Like, they don't know, they can't tell what you're thinking, and people could misinterpret you or whatever. So you actually have to create situations where you tell people why you're the right fit. And sometimes people will ask you that question. It's like, what value do you think you're going to bring to the company? And so you need to have those answers. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. And so, for me, because I've been in a service business for a long time, I used to teach martial arts. I used to do sales, because how do you get martial arts students? You have to convince them to join your school. And I got used to that. But as developers, it's something that might sound scary, sound strange, but promoting yourself, talking about yourself, kind of patting yourself on the back, and saying like, "I've done this, I've done that," it's a good thing. And one thing I heard from a recruiter is, which I thought was weird, but this is what she told me: whenever you're talking about some of your accomplishments, instead of saying "my team" or "V" or the organization, you want to say like, "I did this and this is the result I got." Like, bring it to yourself. And I know it sounds like kind of like self-serving, but you'd have to kind of really show them like, why should they consider you? And it's the weirdest thing. Like, I keep bringing up, like, trying to find a date. But it's the same thing. Like, why should she care? You know what I mean? And or he, why should he care? And you need to answer that question for the interviewer. So I'm going to leave it at that because otherwise I'll go into more examples of
One more
dating.
dating example.
I've been divorced once, so probably not the best person.
No, I mean now we're wandering into for me it's always comes down to whether you're talking about like people's relationships. What always kind of best describe like what I always kind of I don't know how to properly put it, but basically the way I always think of this is a lot of times we focus on probably the wrong thing. I think what really helped me when something that I read, it was like, look, what do you have to offer? And I'm just not talking about like the money or whatever. Again, that could be any kind of relationship. What do you have to offer? Are you generous person? Are you kind person? Are you whatever? Or you're just expecting that everybody is gonna like you and whatever. So that's kind of as far as treating people's relationships. But as far as interviewing, again, that was something that I mentioned last time, and then uh, then my camera went off, so that kind of left me off track. But there was a senior developer. He at the time, I think he worked at Netflix, but not anymore, I guess. And then one thing that interesting, he said that first of all, whenever they give him like some kind of challenge and he's working on it, before he goes any further, the first one he goes and he just kind of talks about himself, some other random problem, maybe a little bit similar to what he's given,
Yeah.
to kind of explain that he worked on that one. And and,
Yeah.
and he also like really stressed this idea that you're the one who's going to have to promote yourself, whether you like that or not, but you're going to have to be the one who's like, yeah, this is what I did and this is what I know. And kind of, I know it feels weird and maybe a little bit off, putting to be self-promoting like that, but no one else, nobody's going to do that for you. And also something interesting, he mentioned that it's usually, let's say, if you're being interviewed by one of the developers there, that it's a little bit off-putting in the beginning, where everybody's like kind of like, I don't know, scared, or not even scared, but like more like nervous. So if somebody comes in really chill, there's this kind of vibe that, because the person who's interviewing, most likely they're chill, they're not like stressing about anything, right? But then if somebody comes out, and usually that is the case, everybody's nervous, that's normal. And I'm gonna, same ways, I'm not saying that I'm different, but he's just saying that the person who's actually the most chill, right away, that person remembers you, because they're like, okay, he was very calm, he was kind of like, I mean, it's easier to say than do, but of course, that's the
Yeah.
scenario.
Yeah, and Don Draper here, he had a comment, said they want to know who they're hiring. And that's 100% true. Like, I had the owner of the company that I work for now, like, you know, he says, look, Paul, like, because when he hired me, he knew that I was more like, because this was a while ago, I was more in the junior level, getting to that intermediate level. And he said to me, I know certain things are going to take you time to do. I know some of the things are going to get slower, but he said to me, coding, you're going to get better at, and something you could improve, and we could teach you things the way we like you to do things. But interacting with a team, showing up for work, being responsible, understanding how to communicate, how to work together, knowing that it's not a competition, but knowing that as a team, we're responsible to getting this product out. So instead of having like these internal, like arguments with people, you understand that you all have to work together to get somewhere. And the fact that you could do that and people like you, I much rather have you, because I know what I'm getting, and I know that like you're going to be very productive. And he said that the technical stuff is easy to learn, but the quality of a person, that's a harder thing to replace. And so, he much rather work with like someone who might not be the best developer, but has all those other things, versus working with someone who's excellent developer, but is arrogant, talks down to people, because no company wants someone like that on their team. And if they do have someone like that on the team, it's not a pleasant place to work. You know what I mean? So yeah, and weirdly, like, I'll just like personal anecdotal story, I'm always nice, and the reason why is like, because I'm like, why wouldn't you be nice to someone? It's just so much easier, because that means your day is going to be better, because you're not going to get into like whatever. And what I've noticed is because I'm nice to people all the time, you know, I get it back. So like sometimes like when I do something stupid, people be like, "Oh, it's okay, Paul. Like it's a common mistake." Instead of like, imagine if I was mean to them, they'd be like, "Paul, you're a jerk. Like, we can't believe you messed that up like that." So like if you like, there was a study done with doctors. If a surgeon does something and they can't save the patient, if they were nice to the family's not going to blame them for surgery not going right. And if the surgeon was not a nice person and same situation, then they would sue the surgeon because like, oh, you're responsible and stuff like that. So I know it's a crazy example, but the point is that being a good person, knowing how to work in a team, having those soft skills do mean a lot. And if you're, and I think that's one of the things people want to see in the interview, even including those, I would make an argument, algorithmic questions where they put you under pressure and want you to answer something. I bet like 50% of the thing that they're looking, I'm just randomly making this number up, by the way, 50% of it is like, okay, can he actually solve this? How does he think about it? And the other 50% of it is like, look, we're putting him under the pressure. What is he going to do? Is he going to lock down and not talk? Is he going to, you know, freak out? Or is he going to, or she ask questions? Knowing that even though we're interviewing him, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask if we're on the right track. They're a team player. And I bet part of those algorithmic questions, they also test to see how you communicate and if you're, you know, closed down or if you're not afraid to ask questions and follow up stuff. And I might have mentioned this before, but the CS50, the Harvard channel, they have a great video. Just look it up. I think it's like how to interview or whatever. And they basically do 3 mock interviews with their students and they show the process. And one thing that I've learned from watching it is how, exactly what I said, is how at those interviews you expected to ask questions and it's actually okay. You know what I mean? Which I was like, I didn't even know, believe it or not. Call me naive. I thought like when you do those interviews, you just have to solve everything yourself, you know, and if you can't do it, you just don't get a job. But apparently, you know, it's not the case. And part of it is how do you communicate with the people that are conducting the interviews?
Okay, I have 3 quick ones that we can knock out questions, and then we have 2
Yeah.
longer ones from Tammy. So I have first one about the coupons. So yep, Tammy was correct. Usually I send them out on 20th of the month. So today is 18th. Oh, there's my friend. Uh, and then so that's like what Sunday or Monday. I'll send them out. When I will release Next.js course. I don't know. At the moment, I'm updating everything. So I just finished updating. Basically, in January, I updated the entire HTML and CSS course. Now I'm updating vanilla JS. I'm adding more projects and I'm adding a little bit more tutorial stuff and kind of rearranging and looking at the stuff that's a little bit outdated. Let's say some VS Code config or whatever. And then once I'm done with that, then we'll see. I want to do a quick tutorial slash project on Redux Toolkit. So that's something that I definitely want to do, and that will be added to a React course. And then we'll see. Again, I have quite a big things kind of coming my way as far as personal life. So this year is going to be interesting. I'll do my best to kind of to add as much as I can, but we'll see. Maybe not the entire year, but first half for sure is going to be pretty interesting. What else we have? I'm interested in React.js to learn how much JavaScript should be mastered in JavaScript and normal. For me, again, you need to know how to iterate over a list. You need to know how to fetch data. And in order to get there, you need to know some fundamentals. So I would say those 2 for sure. Everything else you can kind of pick it up along the way if you really want to. So again, the more you know, the better. The more ES6. But in order to get there, you do need to understand what are the variables, objects, and functions, and all that. And once you, let's say, if you do have some fundamental knowledge and you start React, you can always look up what is the map method, what is the filter method. But the more JavaScript you know, the easier it will be. Does it mean that you have to learn 5 years vanilla JS? No, it doesn't. But I mean, it's a fundamentals knowledge is, of course, awesome. And again, that would go iterate over the list and fetch the data. And then in order to get there, you have to have fundamentals. You want to add something, Paul?
No, I had a question that randomly popped up because you were talking about JavaScript, and I didn't make it too far in your Node course. I'm working through it. It's an excellent course. So the question is, because when I work with React, specifically front end, I always use functional programming, but I know that some people, when they do vanilla JavaScript or even when they do backend, they like to use classes instead. So I wanted to know your preference and like, what do you use? Did you like functional, like through and through, meaning on the front end and the back end, or for your back end, do you actually do classes? And
So that one
why?
is actually very interesting where I have few use cases in there where I did basically, if I remember correctly right now, as far as Node, I did use class there to set up errors, to set up basically one error class that is extending from the errors class that is coming from the
Okay, yeah,
JavaScript. And then I just added features, and that was specifically because I wanted to extend from that error
yep,
class. Other than that, no, everything I pretty much set up everything functional because even with vanilla JS, and I know that somebody's gonna scream right now probably, but I find that modules are even with vanilla JS are very nicely supported. You know,
yeah,
again, we're talking about major browsers. If you're gonna come up with some weird phone browser that doesn't,
yeah,
that's a separate story. But to me, that is a very huge step. So I always use even vanilla.js. As my app grows, I use
yeah.
modules. I set up modules. And in worst case scenario, you can always use module bundler, right? So you can always like push it through the one of them, and you'll be fine. And I did set up one of the older projects. I did kind of set up with class, and I have to say it was pretty big pain. It's easy as you're starting out, and then the more functionality you need to do, the more you need to interconnect them. Using modules is way easier
Yeah.
because then you need to start using the static methods, which are just on the instance of the class, and then
Yep.
again, it's kind of it wasn't the application wasn't even that difficult, but I found that the classes are pretty. It was pretty difficult to answer you. So basically, to answer quickly, my preference, even on a backend, is to set up everything pretty much using functional approach. The only difference is that error class because I'm just extending. So in that
Yeah.
case, and there's not
It's
that
easier
much
to write it
logic.
as the
Yeah,
class.
I
Yeah.
just
Then
you set it up as a class, and then you're
yeah, it's
good to
just
go.
easier. Yeah, easier to write. Yeah, no, which is so weird because not that you're using it, but it's weird for me because my previous job was working with C sharp in the back end, which when somebody says like, "What do you do in C sharp?" I'm like, "You use classes," and the way they do stuff in C sharp and writing classes makes perfect sense. But when I work with JavaScript, I do functional like all the way. It makes more sense to me. And one of the things that I started to do, like when I started doing more backend stuff, like I kind of briefly had that question: Well, should I mimic and do everything with classes the way I did it with like C sharp? Or should I do it with you know functional paradigm? And like for me, JavaScript and functional programming is just like or like just makes so much more sense that I think like those to me are the same. So if someone said like, "Can you do class based stuff?" Like I get it, I can, but thinking in those terms uh, in JavaScript, like for me, it's weird. And the way I look at it, it's like, people say, well, your class is like a container for like the thing. And like to me, like, well, my file could be the container for the thing that I have. And like yeah, and so yeah, it's weird. And I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, no, no. The classes for me, I remember I was when I was going into the WGU to software development, I had to learn Java, and that's the one that it was pushed. But I never really in JavaScript. It was always functions, kind of all the way. Listen, let me ask you like a quick question as far as when you're working with Strappy. What is the because I haven't checked their
Yeah.
project in a while. What syntax do they use for modules? Do they use ES6 on the backend, or they use the common JS?
The common JS.
And that's not annoying to you, like that kind of switching between the front end and the backend? Because I did
No,
when
no,
no.
no. To me, like for me, like when I started doing Node initially, it was not supported. Like back then, and so like
Hmm.
to me, like it's just burnt into my head, like just
Hmm.
you do the old way. And so now when people say, "Oh, you could use the new way," I'm kind of like I don't like on the back end. And also the reason why I don't do it is because that's how I know I'm working the back end code. As weird as it sounds, like outside of like taking my VS Code and giving different like color tabs, like the way I import stuff, that's how I know. Okay, this is in back end. This is back end. This is because like you don't want to start making changes somewhere and be like, oh crap, because like when you're doing a full stack application and you have like the back end and the front end, and you're kind of working between the two, like I'm like, yeah, it's easier to confuse. Yeah,
No,
yeah,
I always thought that that was kind of like silly, but then when the moment I started doing Learn projects, like right away, pretty much in the middle of the first project, I'm like, okay, now I understand why they were, because previously, like when it wasn't supported, people were going through these, in my opinion, a lot of hassle in order to get it running on a backend, the ES6 modules, because now it's pretty much you just set up type module and you're good to go. But I mean, there are some gotchas. You cannot, for example, access their name and whatever. You kind of need to import more
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
But I mean, in general, it's pretty easy. And then, but I did see right away the reason why would you want to do that. We have Tammy's question. In my opinion, I think it's critical to have a portfolio page if you have good, decent skills. Do you do it yourself? I think too many folks rely on just having GitHub repos. Thought. Yeah, I would say you do need a portfolio, but I also agree with Alex where the moment you get the first job, that portfolio is. I'm not saying you need to throw it out, but it's not going to be as like relevant. They will basically ask you what you were doing in your job. The moment they will
Yeah,
see that you have a job and all
yeah,
that, and yes, of course you do need a portfolio. But again, the point was kind of that it's always easy as developer to be like, okay, I'll build that next project and then I'll apply, or I'll do that. The kind of the main idea was that you do need to spend way more time than you probably realize on actually already going to those interviews, on setting up the LinkedIn, on doing those things, and then coding kind of comes along. But yeah, that's what I
yeah.
was
If you're
saying.
looking for your first job, you definitely need to know how to build stuff, and the proof that you know how to build stuff is your portfolio projects that you have. But once you had one, two, three jobs, very randomly, people ask to see your portfolio. Like, my last interview, I sent them my resume. They never asked for my portfolio, but they did give me a technical portion of the interview to take home, and obviously I needed to complete it, be able to talk about it, document what I did, to prove that I have the skill. And so that kind of becomes less of a issue. But if you're looking to get your first job, it's like everything, little things you could do to position yourself to stand out above the rest, like make sense. So having a portfolio, having a good LinkedIn, having a properly written like resume, and is all very important. I know we were talking about like JavaScript and all that stuff. There's this kid Tam asked, are people now using TypeScript instead of JavaScript? And I want to give my thought on that first. So if you don't know JavaScript, don't learn TypeScript as your first language. Like TypeScript extends JavaScript. And I worked at a bunch of different companies and they all use JavaScript. And I applied for a company that was using TypeScript. And I told them, like, oh, I haven't built any projects with TypeScript yet. And they basically said, since you know JavaScript and TypeScript is an extension of JavaScript, spend a couple of weekends, learn it, and you'll be able to, you know, like you'll be good to go. So some people think that if they don't know TypeScript, they're not going to get jobs. And at this point, it's not the case. But yes, it is becoming more popular. More React projects are starting to use TypeScript. If you look at Angular, which I don't use, but Angular is written like their framework when you write code in it is with TypeScript. Like you can't do vanilla JavaScript with Angular anymore. And so there's, things are switching, but if you know JavaScript, learning TypeScript makes sense and it's not as difficult. And you don't need to know TypeScript to get a job. Like, if you're just starting out,
But
but eventually.
that is interesting point though, because I do have to say that more and more just documentations are turning into TypeScript. You literally, like, let's say you go for Redux Toolkit, you right
Yeah.
away already, they by default they try to
Yeah.
force you the
To
TypeScript
do
one.
stuff. So yeah.
You can go back to vanilla one, but they're already pushing you the TypeScript. So it's very hard to predict the future, but it's definitely
But
getting more and more popular. So that's definitely the case. But it's going to be that interesting situation then, because let's say if in every job application they will ask for TypeScript, correct? And then the person right away goes for TypeScript without going for Vanilla JS. It's
be
kind
in
of a little bit
trouble.
similar how it, I mean, used to be more, but I guess maybe again it's going to be where Redux, correct? So
Yeah,
everyone was right away instead of
and it
trying to
slows down your
understand,
learning.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you just right away go for Redux, and actually that was counterproductive because
Yep.
it makes way more sense to learn that one first. So I don't know how to, again, I cannot predict the future, but it's definitely getting more and more popular, and at some point it's literally going to be impossible to read some specific documentation if you don't know the TypeScript, or if you're not at least familiar with it and whatever. So yeah,
Y-
it
y-
seems kind of taking over.
Yeah, and if you know JavaScript, like learning TypeScript is not that difficult. I was like I still don't know TypeScript as well, like as I want to, but I know like where to look up stuff. And what's cool about TypeScript is you could basically take any let's say you build a React like project with just vanilla JavaScript, and your next project, you could basically take that same project and convert it to TypeScript and learn everything you need to learn. And you could learn it fairly quickly because you already know JavaScript. But if you don't know JavaScript, like you said, John, like learning TypeScript first will be counterproductive. Yeah, it won't, like, it'll definitely slow you down. So, like, the reason why I say don't worry about TypeScript, because in my mind, if you know JavaScript, learning TypeScript for you is going to be easier. It's like I ate with a spoon and now I'm using the fork. It's like, it's dissimilar enough that you just, like you're going to be able to pick it up quickly. But if you don't know how to code and you don't know JavaScript, learning TypeScript would be like, huh, what's happening?
Yeah,
It'd be
but
difficult.
and that's a I think it took me a little bit of time to kind of understand these um sequences, let's put it this way, where I was I wasn't that tempted in the beginning to jump on the frameworks and everything, and at some point I also realized that I tried Redux multiple times, and then of course the moment I understood how the React works, then switching to Redux was like, okay, so that makes sense. And then I kind of took that into consideration with the rest of the tools as well, and I do see that because, and I don't blame anybody, but again, if someone sees the job application and it says there clearly you need to know this technology, and they're like, well, why do I need those ones if that's the one that I'm looking for? But effectively it's based on something the same as, again, I don't have to repeat myself, but there's, like, most questions I have in React course are about CSS. They're
Yeah.
not about,
There's
because
yeah.
people are comfortable with JavaScript, whatever, but since it's not written in specifically in a job application, it's like that one gets skipped right away, and then
Yeah.
they're done with React, and the question is, well, okay, but how do we actually build this? And that's where that, as annoying someone finds CSS, unless there's some kind of way to use maybe framework, maybe something else, but yeah,
Alex
that's
says TypeScript is not that easy. Well,
but
okay. He might be right. Might be right. I don't know. I like I've done C sharp before learning TypeScript. And so like C sharp is strongly typed language. And so maybe like that's why TypeScript made more sense eventually. But I don't know.
okay. I feel like everyone moving to PostgreSQL from MongoDB. Looks like Mernstack will be Pernstack. What do you think? I don't think anybody has been moving. I think it's always been the case. Again, one of those unwritten rules where, I mean, maybe not even rules, but unwritten things about the industry where pretty much the major companies are still using SQL. And again, not to say I'm not one of those people who just dismiss MongoDB altogether, but if we're just looking at the popularity's sake, it's going to be SQL is just more popular at the end of the day, and I don't think people have been moving away from it. Is just
So
maybe eventually they're just catching up to that, I would
it's
say.
what you said before for teaching someone backend development. You're already doing so many different things. You don't want to add additional point of friction because Mongo is so much easier to get into, and you could easily set it up and you could work with it fairly easily, and you could build out your full stack application, where working with Postgres or SQL adds additional like layers of difficulty of setting it up and working with it and then deploying it. And so I know and see why there's so many tutorials. All the jobs I had, they all use SQL and Postgres, and so I refuse to work with a Mongo DB, not because it's bad, it's good. And it's just because, in my opinion, anybody looking to get hired today need to be familiar with Postgres QL and SQL type databases. And I'm not saying that I haven't did my share of Mongo DB tutorials. I've done like plenty. I've done Firebase tutorials. I did MongoDB. I don't do Firebase anymore. I don't do MongoDB anymore because I've done enough. And now that I work, at my work, we're not using any of those things. And so for me, where I am, like I'm constantly working on Postgres. I'm constantly trying to get better with that. And not to say anything, but when's the Postgres section being added to your course, John? Just kidding. By the way, I know that sounded like really bad in terms like, oh, I don't use Mongo, whatever. It is an excellent learning tool, and you all should build one project if you're building full stack in a way which is easier to get started with. And so what I would say, everybody build your first project with Mongo, and then take that same project and change it to use like Postgres or SQL, because it's not like you're going to be writing everything from scratch. You're just going to be, changing how you communicate with a database. But, so I think that's a good practice. So kind of to come back on the thing that I'll never do Mongo again, because I don't want to lie to you guys on public television here, because I am going through your course. So like you're using Mongo. And so my challenge is to create the uh, everything with Mongo, and then take that same code base and convert it to use Postgres, and then eventually convert it to use GraphQL with Postgres. That's my big plan for myself. Um,
Yeah, this one is very interesting to kind of answer because I again for me I guess the biggest difference between like I just looked at it differently. I needed to get some APIs, you know, out there essentially, and that seemed to me the best kind of approach where
yeah,
I never looked at it as, and again I'm not even talking right now, I'm not answering your
yeah,
that was a valid point. I'm more like thinking about there seems to be this idea that uh that basically that MERN stack is the only way how to become a full stack developer, and that's not,
right,
again there's
yeah,
there first of all, if that's going to be your first job, it's very hard to get into right away a full stack. It's going to be easier
yeah,
way to be a front end developer or a back end developer. And even back end is going to be a little bit harder than the front end. That's number one. And yes, if you're going for back end, then learning SQL is way more crucial. For me, it was just again, I think of that as a very easy kind of way to get up the full stack project. Now,
up and running.
can
Yeah,
you like make an argument that you might as well then use Firebase and
no,
what's the name?
no, don't make that
The
argument.
well, I mean
I'm
Strappy,
just kidding.
whatever, one of those,
Okay, Strappy uses Postgres. Okay, listen.
yeah, but so what I'm saying is like we have discussed this before already on this podcast slash live stream where
Yeah,
there are other options, and I cannot say like, look, you should use this one or that one. For me, it just made sense because I'm more independent when I make that API because I don't have to worry about
yep,
Firebase changes. I don't have to worry about Strappy changing something,
yeah, one
and
hundred
and
percent.
and what really like helped me going through that path is one other thing that I mentioned where this really helped me to understand on the front end how things are happening. And when I did try the Firebase, I did not feel that way. Basically, it's an awesome service. You can use it. Okay, you're
Yeah,
good to go. But it didn't like make me understand, okay, what is the HTTP request? How does that work? So
yeah,
what is
yeah,
put, what is post and all that.
yeah.
But eventually I definitely, people have been, I communicate with quite a few, let's say, people who are applying for jobs, and it's definitely the case where in interviews they're looking more for SQL. So, in my opinion, it's a good stepping stone. It's a good way of understanding how things work. But you will have to graduate to SQL to kind of
But
give you the long
one thing I
answer.
would say to you, that, like, that's why I said don't bring up Firebase, is because Firebase is a very hard jump to go from Firebase to, okay, let's use, Mongo or Postgres. But if you, let's say, as a student, let's say you did like 5 like projects, they all use MERN, right? And the job you apply to, they might say like, well, we require PostgreSQL. You will still get that job because you're like 80% there. Uh, because the only difference is your backend implementation, but it's not even like your backend implementation in terms of, I mean, the database implementation, but you already understand, get, put, update, whatever, delete, the functionality. And so when you go from Mongo to Postgres, it's not that big of a jump because you're literally 80% there. It's just learning the particulars in terms of the difference in, between, Mongo and relational databases, and also how do you directly call that database, or what package do you use to call, the SQL to make it easier to work with. But it's not like you have to relearn everything. That's why I'm saying, like, if someone does your MERN course, and let's say for the sake of the argument, I'm just going to say it, you never ever release a Postgres course. You just say, you know what, screw this, I'm not going to release Postgres. I will 100% say anybody who completes your Mongo course, they could take that project and then they could read up on Postgres, and within like 2 weekends they could start like re-implement everything to use Postgres. And they're literally going to be maybe rewriting 10% of the application, maybe. You know what I mean? And that's it. And that's why,
Yeah,
like, to me, like, I don't get mad about MERN tutorials, because they take you like 90% there. And the only difference is like how are you going to implement your, like,
yeah.
which
The
database you're going to implement.
the
Yeah.
core
Sorry.
functionality in your Express application does not change. You still have the same
Exactly.
controllers. You
Exactly.
still have,
Yep.
same logic. It's just the difference is once it gets to that controller, how you communicate to the database, and that of course changes the data if you use a different database. But again, the authentication is not going to change. How you again the tokens are not going to change. So all of
No.
that still stays the same. And for me, it's one of those things where. I remember our initial conversation. That would seem like a eternity ago, where we were just discussing about applying for jobs and blah blah blah, and you right away brought up this interesting point. You're like, look, knowing just get request is not it's not end all be all. Now you need to understand how to make a post request, and
Yep.
that to me was like, wow, this is like I couldn't put it any better. And where I'm going with this, when you build that full stack application, you're finally exposed to that, where again
Yes.
you're not going to get this with Firebase, unfortunately. Like, as much as you import, you set it up and you're good to go, but you're not going to be exposed to that. Well, how do I actually write that post request? What do I put in there? Why do I need to have a content type? Okay, what else is important as far as the headers? What about response? Where do I store the user, and all of those things? And I think that's crucial, like as you're progressing. Okay, we have
Yeah.
an awesome one here. What are good portfolio projects for a new React developer looking for his first job? Thanks. I always will go with store. To me, that's if you can set up all that functionality. I mean, the even better if you can do it technically, as far as having some kind of backend to communicate. That's even the best one. But again, you can start with simple rendering and filtering stuff. So let's imagine I don't know, that could be a real estate page. That could be a products page where you can filter the items through. You can showcase that you understand the logic of showcasing certain categories, showcasing
Yeah.
how you can get depending on a price, how you can sort it and whatever. So that's one of them. Or if you can do that with the database, meaning you can do the full stack one, that's even better. And to me, that kind of yeah, is a really good one. And of course, something also that Paul has mentioned, that to me I think is the next level, the one that Paul is building, the bug tracker, when you already have way more logic
Full
kind of,
CRUD.
and
Yeah. CRUD functionality.
yeah, the whole thing. So what do
I
you
was
think?
gonna I
I
was gonna
already
mess with the
stole
guy.
your.
I was gonna mess with the guy. Said he needs to go back and learn a bunch of jQuery, but then I was like, no, like, why, if he believes me, and then it's just gonna be the end of the world. I think, like, exactly what you said. Building like like a store is definitely a great starting project. Actually, a great starting project is basic website with React, and then filtering, like you said. But pretty much everything you said. I like your filtering idea because, like, and real estate. So you could, I'm sure there is somewhere a real estate API which has a bunch of listings, and you could basically create an application which shows like listings that you could filter by price, filter by state, like how many bedrooms they have. I think that'll be like a cool application to make. The only reason I say that is because I worked when I long time ago I did WordPress. Um, they wanted us to add that functionality in their WordPress project, which I was like, I don't know how to do that. But what that's besides here or there. But the fact that that's like if you're a real estate company, you basically want that functionality. So to me, that's a useful project because there's plenty of like examples, and when you show it to someone, they'll right away know that this is a useful project. Like if I'll make a tic-tac-toe game, they'll be like, why? Why did you do that?
Yeah,
Why?
that's as far as the games again. Not, I'm not saying that there isn't any logic or whatever.
If you're a game developer, it makes sense.
For me, it's
You know,
kind of, it comes down to, first of all, well, when it comes to e-commerce, they will be most of the employers, especially if we're talking about smaller agencies or whatever. And if you can showcase that you can do that logic, that you can set up those products, you can kind of navigate through all of that, and you understand how to, how to work with a request where the pages are coming in and all that. That I mean, you're
so
already in good shape.
I once knew a girl, and the reason why I say once, I haven't talked to her in a while, and I'm pretty sure it's because she's busy. But like I remember, she had questions about what should I build for my portfolio, so I recommended to her that she goes through all of your React course, and then she basically built an e-commerce site, and then she redid it again based on what she learned from your course, and kind of put on her own flair, and then she got an interview, and then she got hired, and then she stopped talking to me. So I get it. I was like the stepping stone for her changing her life. But the point, no, I'm sure she's super busy. But what I'm saying is that, you know, uh, like that was an example of someone that built e-commerce store, and it was enough for someone to like be like, oh, that's a great project, and hire her. So you know that that's something I saw in real life, and I just wanted to share it here, that if you have something like an e-commerce or something, like you're gonna get it, you're gonna get the job. I'm just super paranoid, and I always feel like if you don't have full crud, like no one's going to hire you. But that's because I am 41 years old now, and I'm constantly paranoid that I'm never going to get hired. I'm too old. And so I'm always trying to outdo myself to be like, what is the best project I could build to get hired? Which is a double-edged sword, because if you try to make something too complex, then you'll make the same mistake I made for the first 4 years, where you'll start like 1,000 projects, but you will finish zero of them, and then you will not have anything to show in your portfolio. The moral of the story is build a uh, e-commerce site and put it in your
I would
portfolio.
kind of, and I like what Alex is saying here. He's like, one project can set you up. Keep telling you guys, start applying, and this kind of
100%.
brings us back to the point with our main conversation today, where my kind of opinion of the best approach, and again, that could be, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but at least that's what I've always done. Where, look, you go through the small projects, you learn how to build them, you can set them up, you can be good to go, and then you just need to pick that one thing, build that one thing, and start doing something about it. Because again, for it, I mean, software development is one of those things where you can endlessly build applications, endlessly.
For
It's just,
eternity.
it's, there's always going to be some ideas that you can do. You can do this game, you can do that, you can pick one thing where you can showcase how you can fetch data, how you can iterate over. There is no magic one project that will get you hired. It just doesn't exist. I mean, of course you should make something more difficult than, let's say, changing the background when you click the button. Yeah, that's not what I'm saying. Point here is that you'll not, I mean, it's going to be very hard to find one project that every company is just going to open the doors and say, come on in. it's not the case. It's again, it's more important for you to make that project and then start doing, like Alex was doing. It was going around the companies, getting rejected, applying, meeting people, whatever. That is way more important at that point once you have that project, instead of just trying to outsmart everybody and build something that, that will right away get you hired.
Yeah, 100%. And I would add to that, the project that you build has to be somewhat relevant. So you don't have to go like out of your way to do something crazy. But if you're applying for web dev and you make a tic-tac-toe thing, that's not relevant to web development. And I would say, like, let's say you're having hard time standing out and you're like, oh man, like what should I do? So let's say if you're applying to Spotify, e-commerce project will make more sense than a real estate site. You know what I mean? And so, like, kind of knowing the domain, because web development is so huge that there's so many different things you could do. And there's like people who only do e-commerce sites, or people who only do real estate sites, and so, like, not saying you have to do that, but sometimes, like, if you know already where you're applying, like, um build something, if you can, like similar to what people are expecting, if that makes sense. You don't have to, but if you could take that extra step, I think it'll be helpful. Um, you know.
Tammy has an interesting one. Is there some logical way you guys could structure a course that helps teach how to structure and write logic of the projects? I know this is vague. So I probably don't have the best answer, but this is again something we have talked about, and this is not just me saying or Paul saying. I have read this in multiple awesome books and developer books and just regular books, where I would always say focus on the smallest thing possible and then just keep adding the functionality. So if you have some kind of general idea of what is going to be, then start with the smallest thing, whether that is a nav bar, whether that is a footer, whether that is whatever the case may be. But I this is also that I noticed in one of the projects that I was doing. It was, you kind of I needed to set up the state, and then I was like wondering, should I do it this way with multiple context providers, or should I do it with just one, or should I do whatever Redux? And then I noticed that I spent literally 3-4 hours just staring at the screen, and then the only thing that helped me was just where I went with, okay, you know what? Let me just go with one example, and if this is not going to work, then I'm going to try something else. And of course I refactored that whatever state 3 times, but at least I got somewhere. Otherwise I felt like, I mean, the brain is just burning, and I'm just staring at the screen because I go like, "Oh, what if I do this way, is it going to work?" Or, okay, but what if I go with different approach, but then this is not going to work? And then eventually you're just all the time stuck and you're thinking about. And I think this is the biggest thing when it comes to those big projects. Once you get the first kind of, I don't know, again, like nav bar in place, actually you'll see how slowly things start rolling your way. But if you're just going to be staring at that big project and whatever, then I don't see how, you'll just magically pick it up. Because when it comes to those big applications, it's literally just those small pieces that you need to solve. It's not like some magic that now you need to solve everything all together. You still will have this part of the application where you're fetching data, and this one you're displaying or whatever, and all of those things. So I don't know whether this answers the best the question, but that is definitely my approach. Would start with the smallest, kind of thing possible. What do you think?
So I was talking to my friend, and he was saying, whenever people building projects, they often add too many things, too much complexity, where it gets too fast out of hand that they'll never actually finish the project, and they end up quitting. And he kind of told to me, like, when you have an idea, figure out what's the most minimum thing that you needed to do to be considered a minimum viable product. And it's like you take stuff away until you can't take anything away anymore. So for me, and I did this, like, before having this conversation without even realizing, but I was had to build a project for the interview. And what I wanted to do is that I didn't want to start building something and then run out of time and not have anything show for it. And I realized, to me, a completed project is something that is deployed and people could see publicly. To me, that's like a sign that like, okay, you built something and you deployed it. It's like, great job. And so what I did is I basically had three features. One, you could log in. Two, you could add a project, and three, you could add a bug, and then you could see either all the projects or you could see all the bugs. So very limited features. And what I did is I built out the application, the front end, and the back end, and I deployed it. And what's awesome now, it has very limited features, but it's deployed. People could go on it right now. They could log in and they could add a project, they could add a bug. And to me, why this is like really awesome is that if I stop and don't do anything with this project, it's still a completed project because it does the things that it was supposed to do. But also, if I want to add additional features, it's already deployed and it's already live. So I could start, adding new features and testing them and deploying them as I go along. And that way, like, now I have something that I could show people and people could use, if that makes sense. So it's like, instead of trying to build a biggest project you possibly can, start with the simplest feature that works, and then you could decide, do I want to continue building this project or do I not want to continue building this project? But at least you don't have what I have in my GitHub, is a graveyard of unworking, unfinished projects that never went anywhere. And so that's kind of like what I've been doing. And another thing, what I started doing, and this is something that I always ask you, uh, but like the answer, like, I don't ask it directly, but I say, like, what's your planning? Like, when you're building a course, like, what do you do? What's your planning process? And you kind of give me like a good vague answer, uh, you know, uh, because this is one thing I realized: when people starting out, the hardest thing, it's like, the biggest mistake people make is they try to code their project. They try to just start coding, but they don't go through like a planning phase. And so whenever I ask you that question, I want to know the secret. Like, what do you do specifically? How do you organize your thoughts? How do you because to me, that's the hardest part. It's like, how do you plan a project that you could build? And this is something that I've been, learning about, and through trial and error and practicing. And what I realized, when you do a little bit of planning, it goes a long way. So I used to plan before, like, on a piece of paper. Now, then I used to do some like really terrible mockups. Now try to do stuff a little bit like better. But what I realized, when you have a plan, it's much easier to know what to code, if that makes sense.
So can I mess with you first of all on your
Y-
previous response? You you
Yeah.
had two of them. Well,
Yeah.
Paul, but what about email verification when you log in, and what about image upload? I'm just
What
messing with you because this was the first one. I knew, like, so okay, let me answer, like, you
I
kind of.
handle both of them, by the way. Like, whatever, like, your
No,
like
you
question.
no, you did. When the initial project, you said that you only logged in and you added the project, and it's kind of one of those funny things. Whatever project you will release, there's immediately gonna be a person who just randomly
So
picks up some feature and says, "Well, why this is not included?" And
so
then,
so so I didn't do the email verification because I ran out of time, but I made sure you could upload an image. Okay, I'm just gonna say
oh,
that. But to, whatever, tomato tomato. But the point is, the 100% true. People would not be satisfied. But here's the thing: the person that I presented the project to, they saw that it's deployed, and to them, that already automatically said one thing: this guy appreciates and understand this idea of releasing a product. That means, like, you're not a dreamer, but you are a uh, I don't know what the word would be, implement or whatever, but you just get stuff done. And when people see that, like, it's one thing for me to show you an example on my local uh, environment, local hosts and whatever, than it is for me to say, like, go to www whatever and check out the project yourself. And my last company I worked for, they were basically in development hell because for many years, they've been working on this project and they've yet to uh, like, release it, and they never do release it. And so they're trying to fix problems that are not even problems. How do I know it's not a problem? Because you don't even have clients. How can you have a problem if you don't have, like, a problem is like, a client goes to do something and it doesn't work, and then, okay, it's a problem, you got to fix it. And so, to me, what I learned from my previous job, uh done is better than perfect. So I much rather have oh, you could log in and you could add a project. So what? You can't add an image, even though you can. I don't care because it's deployed, it's done, it's out there, and now I have a like basic skeleton project that I could continue to build. But what I was going to say for anybody that listening is that wherever you are, you might be way ahead of me, but make sure you guys plan your project, even if it's in the most ridiculous way. A plan is a roadmap that allows you to kind of know what you're doing. And I could show you, like, I started using this tool called Miro, and they don't, they don't give us any money. So I already feel bad that I mentioned their name, except it's like a pretty good like presentation. So I could kind of show you, and I'm not an expert planner, guys, by the way, but I want to give you an idea of like, uh, that you should have something, even like it doesn't have to be worse or better, but you need to have some idea of what you're building. It's like, if like, otherwise you're going to be spinning your wheels and waste a lot of time. Do you mind if I share my screen for a second?
No, 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 not at
But
all.
just
That's
really
your.
quickly, this is something like, um I've been kind of, uh can you guys see my screen? I don't know, can you see it?
1 second.
It might take a
Okay,
delay there.
it shows down here, but I don't see how.
Oh, that's okay. If people can't see it, that's fine. I'll show it next time.
I'm just. Which one I need to click on, solo or with?
Oh, don't worry, don't
Oh,
don't worry about it. It's too complex.
okay.
But
I put it now. It's your thingy and your picture. So
does it show the amazing, uh,
it shows like
me-
it's a bug tracker. It's the thing.
yeah. So the point is not what I'm building, but basically the thing is, like, number one, I decided what tech I'm going to use. And then basically what I did is I created like this little roadmap of what I want the thing to accomplish. And I made like little mock-ups. And I'm not even going to spend a lot of time on there, but like very brief, like, it's, this is a login. It should have email input, password input, and kind of like the steps that it should take, the screens it should go into. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but basically something even as simple as this, I now already have a roadmap of kind of like what I want to accomplish. And this is the point of this, is not like, um, to be like, oh, you got to make it perfect or not perfect. The point is that you should have a general idea what you're trying to build first before you build it. So now I could go and follow this roadmap and kind of build out my application. And having a little map like this done with Mirror, which is like fantastic, actually now makes it much easier because I know exactly where I am on my building journey. And after, all this is done, I deploy it, and then I think about what is the next feature I should add. And then I basically, will map up another simple thing to kind of give me an idea of what I need to do. So
And how
the
long? I'm
thing,
sorry to interrupt you. How long did it take you? Let's say for you to kind of uh to set that one up, as far as
so
learn how to, because it looks really good.
oh, it's Mira. Like, so like this is the funny part. Mira like made me look more professional than I really am. So basically Mira had a template that like I kind of found an example of. So he doesn't even have to look that professional, but Mirror like makes it look better.
And
If I did on a piece of
it's
paper.
Miro. Yeah.
Yes. And but the point is, you don't even have to use Mirror. What I'm trying to say, the biggest mistake I made is code first, then try to figure out what to code. But now I'm realizing is that you can't do that, even though you're excited to code, because as new, like June, like when we're learning to code, we think that's the most important thing, and that's not the fact. The most important, like, code is something that allows you to implement your solutions, but your solutions, your whatever you want to call them, your algorithms, your like recipe for what you want to do, it's something that you have to plan out yourself ahead of time, and you have to figure that out. And the best way to do it is you do it on paper or use like a tool like Mirror. And this is something that I haven't done for a long time, and I just recently started to do that. And what I realized, I actually save more time. And I know we all heard this before, that, plan now so you don't whatever the insert any whatever people say things in here. But like, it literally saves time and allows me to be able to continue work on my project and be able to kind of know what I have to build. And I'm not saying the plan is set in stone. You could always switch things and fix things, but it's been saving me tremendous time. And I know that when you work at a company, you have something like that. You have the thing of features, you have like the requirements that people need to do, and that's provided to you. So it's kind of makes it easier if you're just starting out. But if you're building your own project, no one's providing that to you. So you kind of take the extra time, plan it out, and do it yourself. And one like it I just it just saves so much time. And if you're not doing it, you guys start planning what you're going to do. That's basically my lesson. And I'm just so upset because it took me forever to learn this, and I'm just so upset because I could have been more productive much sooner if I only listened to other people that tell you planning is important.
So for me, like to answer your question that you were like saying, well, how do you like plan the project? And it's not like I really have thought about it. This is not something where I'm like sitting there and trying to come up with the ways how to hide that. Like, but if the answers are coming off vague, I just really don't know how to like explain properly. But it also comes down to the fact that sometimes people don't believe when you say, what is your approach. So for me, it always comes down to like you just said, make something that is the most basic thing ever, like CRUD, right? Always with every technology, start with the CRUD. Start understand those fundamentals, because it's gonna be way harder to always come up with that awesome project if you don't have those fundamentals. If you have that CRUD application at the most basic level, it's always going to be easier to build on top of that. So you'll see in every course, it starts off with something and it slowly progresses towards that CRUD. Then once the CRUD is done, then we make the big leaps and jumps. And that's always the first thing that with any technology, pretty much I start. It always
Mhm.
starts with, can you like delete, update, and whatever the other ones are.
Yeah.
And
Let me ask.
yeah, sorry. And when
Yeah. Let me ask.
let me just add quickly. And if you say
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
to people, they don't believe you. They think, no,
No.
you're lying.
No.
There has to be
No.
some other way.
No. But that's even that right there is too complex. Like to me, the process. But it makes sense. Like, let me ask you a question. Before you record a video, before you write any code, do you have some notes that you reference?
I build out the like okay, no, let's say, let me give you an example. So, routing in Next.js. Okay, so how would I do that? Well, I would have like some base project where I start with the most basic site, how to set up index JS site, then how to set up about JS site. Okay, right next, how can you link from one site to another one? You make another, and you kind of, yes, I make application one by one. So let's say if you're going through the docs, I don't just skim through the docs. I go like,
Yeah.
okay, how can I apply this? Because the moment you need to write that code in your own like computer, and this is why I always stress about having it on your own computer, that makes the entire thing, just because you know how the code is written in the docs, it's way different when you have to actually write it in your on your own computer, on your own setup.
Let me
It,
ask you a question, since like we're talking about doing the docs. Have you ever done the docs and you like swear to God it's the same exact code that's in the docs and it still doesn't work?
yes.
It happens to me and I get so upset. And sometimes it's something stupid, sometimes it's something like I did, sometimes it's like whatever. But I get so annoyed that the same exact code is not doing the same exact thing it's supposed to do. Uh,
It has been the cases where it's like, there's definitely one in Gatsby where they were using like a common JS syntax in the project, and they have this weird thing where they import the file, but they add default to it as basically invoke it as a default.
yeah.
And I was missing it. I was just, because I was like, okay, import file, okay, good, and then it wasn't working. But I have to admit, there has been some cases where you do exactly like the docs say and it doesn't work, and after trying some multiple stuff, I'm like, okay, so I guess, whatever. I mean, just kind of, there has been cases like that
So
where
here's the one thing that made it much easier for me is that I realized that the documentation is written by other humans, and sometimes
they
they
can make
make
mistakes.
mistakes, and so that but because I saw something I was reading somewhere, and the thing didn't work, and then I googled and someone in Stack Overflow, and I'm like, oh no, that's slightly different, and but it's hilarious.
Yeah,
uh
but to again to kind of like to finish that point, yeah. If the question is how to get to that crud, I would say definitely like I've been saying, and something that I really liked that Alex pointed out, where again you need to like make the project and then you need to try to do them yourself. So again, this is where I'm going with this, where just because it's written in docs, it's a huge step for you to actually write it yourself, because at least you're like getting yourself familiar with
yeah,
that code,
yeah,
because it's always easy to look up the docs and say, okay, yeah, that's how it works. But then, like you just said, the moment you start typing, you make some kind of mistake, maybe along the way you'll find something that you were not aware of. Like we all know that the best way to learn is actually having those bugs, even though they're annoying. But
yeah,
in that process, in the thick of it, this is where you actually like learn like the best kind of scenario. And this brings me back to yesterday. Since I've been pressured left and right, and of course I'm doing the air quotes right now, I really appreciate it. But since you and Alex like David Goggins, of course, I've been become a huge fan now too. And he's awesome. I really like him, and this is one of the things that I was watching interview yesterday with him, and this is something he also kind of repeated, that the best, we always avoid those tough conversations with ourselves, but the
yeah,
best time and way to learn is having those difficulties. If
yeah.
everything goes smoothly, you're not like, when you're struggling with your code, let's say if you watch somebody else do the project and then you have to do the project and you're struggling, it's the best place ever. I know it doesn't feel that way, but it is, because you're learning stuff, you're trying stuff, and all that. So
1000%. So all the things that I never forget are the things that I had to fix myself. Those are like are embedded in my memory. So if someone asks me like a GraphQL mistake I made, like I already know like what it is. I know how I fixed it, and I'll never forget it. Rather than and that's why I keep saying people have to build their own stuff exactly for the reason you said. Like you need to struggle with the things, you have to figure things out, and it's just there's no other better way to learn, and that's why tutorials will get you far enough, but to get the rest you need to build your own projects. And um, the only reason I make like I say like I need to know your planning secrets, because every time I take your course, they're so methodically, logically, and such a nice progression and so well done. I'm like, there's this guy definitely plans what he's gonna do, and you consider like, okay, start from the smallest building block and then build on top of it. And I like that because it makes it, it gives people logical progression of how to do things. And like in your node course, for instance, you implement like just vanilla node before jumping into express, and I think that's important for people to be able to see the differences and to see what express solves, but behind the scene, how it works. And one thing that I get upset, like, people do it to a certain extent, but some people do it more than others. So they'll be like, we're going to build a basic React application, and then they like will inject like 20 npm libraries, and so now it's no longer like a React app, it's a React app that's powered by 20 individual packages. And so someone who's a beginner, they don't get to see how you would implement those things with vanilla React. And then they get more confusing, where in your case, like every tutorial you do, you start from the basic building blocks, make sure that people understand the basic building blocks, and then you add to that. And so it's like to me it's like so well organized, and that's why I keep saying such good things about your courses, not because you keep inviting me back to this podcast, but yeah. And like, and every time I see a tutorial where it's just like they add unnecessary stuff too early, I'm just like, oh, it's like I. Here's what I came. This is completely off topic, but here's the thing that I came to. Like, you don't have an ego. Like, you don't have an ego where you don't have a need to inject like, oh, I know this cool thing, let me show it to you way too early in this tutorial. Where like some other like instructors, I'm assuming they're like, oh, I did this cool thing. Let me quickly talk about it so people think how awesome I am. And let me tell you about this package I use. This is great. And it's like, I don't care about that. I want to learn the basics of coding so I could learn how to do this on my own. I don't need to know about all these different cool things to do. And I like that um, you start from very finish, not finish, like very beginning, and then you slowly work your way up. Because to me, that progressive learning makes sense, and I equate that to teaching jujitsu, where you start as a white belt and you work with other white belts. Because if I put you with a purple belt or a black belt, you're not going to learn anything, and you're going to go home beat up. And I don't want to feel beat up by my coding tutorials. I want to make sure that I learn the things as I need to learn them to set the foundation in order to be able to be successful in like what I'm doing. I like your approach of how you break things down into the smallest working thing, like your example you use with React Router, and you do it in kind of its own thing before you add it to your application. It's like you work on things in isolation to really get to understand how it works before moving on and implementing. And I feel like a lot of people skip that stage. They just pick and choose, and they'll put everything together before even spending enough time understanding like what it is and how it works.
So for me, I really actually enjoy working on fundamentals, to tell you honestly. So that's, you want to know a funny story? So I well, now I'm not doing it anymore because of the well, COVID is kind of gone, but anyway, I'll soon pick it up. As far as jujitsu, I was taking privates, and the first thing that I said when I started private, I wasn't like, I said, look, I don't want you to teach me any kind of like whatever the hot new thing that is, like, I want fundamentals. I just enjoy like going through them. But it is the case where, let's say, if as I'm like going, like, as I'm working with Next.js, I'm just writing down things as like, okay, so there's file based routing, there's API files, so I'm just writing them down and I'm writing things about them, and then I'm looking at that list and I'm like, okay, so which orders would make the most sense to me, and kind of approach that way. But I definitely, I enjoy going through those things, and that hot new thing is I don't know, I'm kind of a lot of times split on it. It's sometimes really cool and sometimes it's actually not. So anyway, we're like 122 in, and before my
Damn.
camera shuts off, and as always, like by the time we're done, we have all of these topics and everything. So yeah, and we have my best friend also showed up by the end, and
Yeah, I got two of them. One is like always tries to break stuff and knock the camera down, and the other one just watches this one getting in trouble. It's so funny.
yeah, it was really nice to see all our regulars. Tammy,
Yep.
hopefully Tammy is doing well, especially as far as the computer. Uh, we have Jake. We have, of course, Alex, and maybe I didn't mention somebody else there. But yeah, I awesome. Thank you to everyone who decided to spend time with us on this Friday evening. Hopefully, everyone has a good one. If you're going out, if you're staying in, if you're just watching movies, whatever you're doing, I know you have 20,000 other things that you can do. And so I really appreciate us just coming here and having conversation. One quick thing that I want to add, do want to try out one of these weeks where basically we won't have a theme. I just want to come in, we just sit down and we just start talking. We'll start talking about what we did that week, and then we kind of go from there. I really just want to try it out. Uh,
That'll be cool. Yeah,
to
it'll be
to
good.
to key to
Free
kind
flow.
of, yeah, free flow, how to see how it goes. And again, if you want to hear us on a podcast format, just look for us on web dev
Spotify.
power hour. And yeah, uh, if you're watching this later, then also thank you if you get something out of this. Any last words, Paul?
No, no, just thanks to everybody who was able to attend. I thank you, John, for you know having me come back here. Always appreciate it, always fun. And yeah, definitely get back into jujitsu. I have been out of jujitsu for almost 3 years now, but I'm gonna make a trip and do some jujitsu with you. That'll be fun. It'll be great.
Definitely, you can. I actually forgot to mention last time you were saying about some. You mentioned that you might come
Yeah,
to California, so you're always welcome. We have place. We have a room
yeah.
here
Okay.
for you. So
It's all right. It's all right.
you'll be
I'll
joined
sleep
by.
outside. Fine.
No, no, no. Okay.
I'll fit in. I'll fit in with everybody
No,
else in
you'll
California. I'm
be
just
just
kidding.
you'll be
I'm
joined
just kidding.
by more black cats because we
Yeah, no,
also
it's
have
fine.
so.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
awesome.
So it was as
Speaking,
always nice talking to you. And
yeah, yeah. All right, I'm gonna stop because I sometimes randomly watch cat videos online, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, that's like you could just go on for hours. But have you seen one where the cat discovers he has ears? I'm
no,
gonna have to send it to you.
no, do
I
send
was
it.
like the best video I ever saw. A cat realizes that he has ears in a reflection. I'll send it to you. I blew my mind. I was like, oh my god. Anyway, enough. Okay, bye everybody. Good night.
Okay.
Everybody have a
Have
good
a
one.
great one.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye.